to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making things that are beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka and I'm recording from my living room of my flat. I live in the suburbs of East London, which is where I grew up. And today I'm going to chat to you about some recent finished projects that I've been doing. I'll talk to you about what I'm knitting at the moment, share some mending projects, and then at the end of the video I'll have a chat to you a little bit more about my personal making philosophy and what I hope to achieve from this video. So firstly, I'd like to share a finished object. This is quite recently blocked. And it's this cardigan that I'm wearing, which is called Aureus and designed by Wang. So I started knitting this project in the summer and I knitted on it until the autumn when I finished it, and then put it in a pile for about 6 weeks because I had to seam it together and block it. And I finally finished blocking it, and ever since then I've been wearing it non-stop. So it's this full-length cardigan, and it's a pattern, by Wang, famous, wonderful designer who's so well known for her incorporation of texture, particularly cable texture. And the pattern is from this issue of Pom Pom Quarterly magazine, and it's issue number 7, which is winter 2013. So it's a fairly old copy of the magazine that I was actually given as a contributor copy because I wrote an article in this magazine back in 2013 called Knits I Have Known and Loved, and that is baby old me. And this amazing photograph taken by my friend Nelly, who's a photographer now based in Vietnam. Yeah, so I've had this copy for quite a while and I've actually knit through quite a few things from it, and I was really pleased to finally make this cardigan. So here's the original pattern photography, and it's easy to look it up on Ravelry as well. So they did it in yellow, and it's quite a nice, easy, loose-fitting garment, which is really what I wanted, because I wanted to try and explore making things with a bit more positive ease, because normally I make things that fit me exactly, and that's great, but I just wanted to introduce some different styles and different cuts into my wardrobe. So I made quite a few modifications to this garment. Firstly, and most excitingly, is that I added in these bishop sleeves. So in the pattern, the sleeves are knit straight up and down and blousin a little bit to the wrist. So they're fairly loose, but there's no shaping. And I really wanted this really fabulous exaggerated sleeve that is, 1930s, 1940s, and then was revived again in the 70s and 80s. So that's what I did. I did quite a bit of calculations and cross-referencing between pattern cutting books and knitting books, and I actually found the answers in the pattern cutting books aimed at sewn garments rather than in knitting guidance books. The other exciting modification I did was that I added little pockets in the front on both sides, and they are vertical inset pockets. They're not that big. The reason for that is that in the front there's this lace and cable panel, and I was concerned that the back of the pocket bag would be really obvious block behind the kind of sheer holiness of the lace. So I was a bit cautious and I made them quite small. In hindsight, I don't think that actually it's all that obvious where the pocket is on the garment, and even if you do notice it, it's really not a very big deal at all. So next time I would really go for it and do a much larger pocket bag and be way more confident. In a sewn garment I would have cut a much larger pocket bag too, but this is only the second or third time that I've knitted a pocket, and it's the first time that I've done a vertical inset pocket. I have done a horizontal one before. So yeah, I was a little bit cautious, So I can't fit any large objects into it. I can't put my phone into it. I can't put a wallet, but I can put my hand, and I can put a handkerchief in it. And to be honest with you, that's what I keep in my pockets most of all, like ticket stubs, tissues, and little pockets of warmth. So it works perfectly fine for me. So there's also on this cardigan a really fabulous massive knitted lace panel on the back. And I'll also just show you the buttons that I used, which are these vintage plastic buttons, quite large ones, about an inch in diameter. So in the pattern they only have, I think, 3 buttons at the top, but I put buttons all the way down the length so that it was a bit more flexible and I could get more wear out of it in the winter months. The final main modification I made to this pattern was that I used a completely different yarn. So this is the yarn I used. It is Dance Pelsult 8/2, and it's much finer than the quite plump DK weight yarn which is specified in the pattern. So I had to do some calculations, cast on a slightly different size. I think it came out quite fine. It's quite a large garment on me, but I think because the fabric is a bit more lightweight and a bit finer, it's actually more flattering than an oversized loose garment in a heavier gauge would have been. And I've got a little bit left over. So as well as having the pattern with me for 6 years now, I've also had this yarn for ages because I bought it when I first visited Copenhagen in the spring of 2013, and I bought it from a really amazing knitting shop in Valby, which is, I think it's in zone 2, it's not in central Copenhagen, it's more of a residential suburb with, you know, some shops and cafes and there's stuff going on there, but it's not the city centre in any way. And it was this really fabulous yarn shop that was really known for stocking Danish yarns and other Scandinavian woolly products, such as those boiled felted slippers and Faroese yarn, Faroese garments, like ready-made things as well. There are a lot of people that would travel from the city to go to this shop. And so, the difference was that the other yarn shops at the time, 6 years ago, mainly stocked imports, either British or American or other European imports, and then that was their speciality. You know, if you were Danish and you wanted to get some other yarn that was exciting to you, you could do that. But in this shop, for me as a tourist and for other, you know, locals, was really fabulous to get stuff that was local, because there's not that much wool production in Denmark, I'm told. That's quite limited. And this Dance Pelsult is made by Hjelholt's Uldspinnery, which, if you've watched the Fibre Tales podcast by Lærke, she has featured them several times because they are a wool mill near where she lives in Denmark. So this is with this amazing magenta colour that I was so drawn to. And the wonderful thing about this is that with the fibre and the way it's been dyed, the fabric is not flat in any way. It's slightly, I wouldn't go as far as saying mild, but there's a slightly mottled texture to it, which is really exciting. When you first knit it, it seems a little bit holey, so it's an extremely fine yarn that you could say was like a 4-ply fingering weight or even thinner, but when you block it, it really fluffs up quite a lot. And it has a really lovely hairy halo of the black fibres as well as the pink ones that have taken the dye. So it's really fabulous, and I'm really excited that I've got about just under 200 grams left. Got full skein, and I've got these 2 balls. And I would really like to make a pullover, a much more fitted pullover with the leftovers because I love the colour. Possibly it'll be something striped. I'll have to figure out, maybe I'll look at the gauge again and see if I think I've got enough and what I can make with it. So that will be a future project. More pink things coming from here. Okay, so the next finished object I want to share with you is a pair of socks. I've just put a piece of cardboard inside this because I do not own sock blockers. Something that I will speak a little bit more about at the end of this video. So here we go. Here is my sock, and here's the other sock, which is flaccid. I've knit these out of tuku wool, so on a Scandinavian theme, which are purchased online. So no visits to Finland as of yet. So tuku wool sock, which contains some nylon. So I had this blue colour, I can't remember the colourway name, but basically it's been dyed, I think the same as this pink stuff. It's been dyed on a dark, on the darker fleece rather than a bleached white fleece. So it's taken the dye in a really interesting way. Yeah, and then the white, which I think is probably bleached. I don't think it's natural white, but it's a creamy, warm white. Yeah, so again, I knit these quite a while ago and it took me ages just to finish the toe and then sewing the ends. I really hate sewing the ends of colourwork. I'm a colourwork novice. This was the second, I believe, colourwork project that I had finished only. And it's not perfect, but I'm really happy with how my colourwork is progressing. And it's just got this little motif here. If I zoom in again, I love to include small details on my socks. It's got this colourwork motif, a ribbed body of the sock. It's got an eye of partridge heel with a garter stitch border, and then it's just got this little bit of colourwork on the toe. So I made up this pattern myself. I really like to have ribbing on my sock. I think it helps, you know, kind of suck in and hold the foot much more, because I really hate baggy socks. I think that there's very little worse in a sock than a baggy sock that kind of flops around your foot and falls off, and it's a hazard because, you know, you could slip. No baggy socks, please. So yeah, wrote the pattern myself. It was the first time that I'd knit a pair of socks. There's a crow cawing outside. I live in suburban London and I'm really lucky to have a garden. I mean, I say I'm lucky, I purposefully moved here because there was a garden, you know, I made that choice. Yeah, I mean, podcast co-host or just intruder, it's not a co-host. What was I saying? Yes, it was the first time I'd made a sock in a heavier weight sock yarn. I normally knit with just a 4-ply / fingering weight, and this is a sport weight, but it was quite fluffy, so it felt more like a DK weight, so quite a lot heavier. However, the way it's been spun means that it's very, very airy. So I knit these on, I think it was 3.5mm needles, but I could probably have gone down to 3 and kind of compressed the fabric quite a lot more. So they're a little bit loose. And also this yarn is non-superwash, it's hand wash only. So they're a little bit loose. I expect that they will felt up a little bit with wear just from the heat and the abrasion of the foot, which happens to all of my socks. Even the superwash ones, you know, even the ones that are really super slick, smooth and shiny, they've ended up felting up a little bit around the heel and around the ball of the foot. So that's definitely going to happen with these. For the time being, I'm just wearing them around the house and as bed socks, just to see how it wears. I would really like to develop this into a pattern, but I think it needs a little bit more experimentation and work. It's possible that I might reconfigure the colour work and create, you know, shift the numbers about a little bit and redo the pattern slightly. But for now, it's a slightly loose and very comfortable pair of socks. I'm really, really warm, that are good to wear in bed. in the evenings when it gets, you know, a little bit chillier in the house. Yeah, and just around the flat in general. Don't know why I'm pretending that I own a house, because I do not. I live in a flat, like many people my age who live in London. So yeah, that's my Took You All socks. Okay, so works in progress. I've got a couple, I'm working on a couple of sock projects. So I've got a half object, which is this brick red sock in this texture pattern. And again, it's made out of a slightly heavier sock yarn. It does contain nylon. This one is superwash. And again, a Scandinavian brand. The brand is Novita. So there's a theme to this episode, apparently. Yeah, so it's not, again, it's not a fingering 4-ply sock yarn. It's billed online as DK. I would say it's a light DK, and I knit it with 3mm needles, whereas I'd normally knit a 4-ply sock with 2.5. I'm mentioning those two needle sizes there just as comparison, because you might use a completely different set of needles, size of needles, according to how you tension your yarn and your style of knitting. So it's more that, you know, if I knit a 4-ply sock, I'd use 2.5 personally. And for this I went up to 3, and just decreasing a few stitches meant that I knit it up so quickly. So this was the first one, a little bit of a prototype, and then I've also got the second one, which I've just come onto the heel flap of. And on the second one I've made quite a few refinements to the design, and I'm really enjoying making it. I'm enjoying the fact that some heavier weight sock yarns that include nylon are coming onto the market much more commonly, because I purchased this from a large, you know, national chain department store that has a haberdashery. So yeah, really happy with that. Really happy to have some more warmer colours into my wardrobe, and to be able to knit them up really quickly whilst it's still quite chilly outside. So more on these anon. The second sock project that I'm working on is a pair of scrap socks. And here they are. If I can open them up. I'm doing a magic loop technique. So this is a bunch of leftover 4-ply sock yarns, fingering weight sock yarns. I'm not sure how I feel about the different types of terminology, because there's so much crossover in the language that's used when describing textiles and textile production. You know, an obvious example being worsted, the word worsted, which refers to a spinning technique, a cloth, and a yarn weight. So 3 totally different but related things that could kind of cross over in a very confusing manner. So 4-ply could refer to, you know, the construction of the yarn itself, but also it's a yarn weight category. Really bizarre. Who came up with these things? So yeah, it's, as you can see, it's a little bit nuts. But that's that. I've knit quite a lot of socks. I started knitting socks quite seriously in 2016, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was 2016. So we're coming on to 16, 17, 18. Yeah, so we're coming on to 19, the 4th year of knitting socks regularly. So I had loads and loads of leftovers, and it was getting too much. So I've been working through all of the scraps and the leftovers and combining them into scrap socks in different ways before I next purchase another ball of sock yarn. Obviously it didn't work for that that project there. That was an afternoon of madness where for some reason I was in central London where the office that I work in is, and I felt a bit mad, so I had to get in some air. It was really stuffy, and I found myself walking into a department store and purchasing a ball of yarn. I really don't know how it happened. Yeah, how did that happen? I really don't understand. It's a mystery to me. So yeah, knitting these scrap socks, finishing up leftovers, and really I find it, even though I think this pair looks a bit bizarre because this heel is so bright, but I know that it will dull down a little bit after it's been washed. I'll show you all the different scraps. I mean, when I say scraps, I really do mean scraps. You know, like that. Oh, it's probably not focusing. But like really tiny bits of leftovers. So I found that in a pair of socks for me, and I wear a UK 6 or Europe 39, that's my shoe size, I will use about 65 grams. So that remaining 35 grams is not enough to knit a pair. And I will then combine that leftovers from different, you know, sock projects and have contrast heels, toes and ribbed calves. And then sometimes I find that I'm still left over a bit more. So this rainbow is a self-striping sock yarn, and I knit the first rainbow sock on its own. The second sock I striped it and did a scrap sock, and now I'm having the third scrap sock just because I need to use it up. And yeah, I think it looks really nice on the ankle, and it's starting to get a bit crazy on the foot because I've run out of rainbow, and I'm just striping together different pink and burgundy yarns. And I should have enough rainbow to do one more cuff, or at least the majority of the cuff. So the point is that the socks will look the same once they're in a shoe, and you'll just see the ankle peeking out. Even if it's like a Mary Jane shoe or something with cutouts or a little bit open, or a clog, you'll still mainly see the ankle and maybe a tiny bit of a heel, and you know, around the front where the ankle goes into the foot, you'll see that. But you're probably never really going to see the foot and the toe. So I'm at peace with that. It's great that I'm making something out of what is essentially nothing. Like, it's not even the leftovers, it's the leftovers of the leftovers. And I'm really pleased with that. So that's the first sock. I must admit, I'm finding it a little bit boring to work on. I think it's simply because I've made so many scrap socks at this point, and I might share, if you're interested, I might share that with you in a future video. So I'm mainly taking this sock to knitting groups. I'm taking it with me on the commute when I have to go into town, and just kind of doing it when I don't want to use my brain, so I can multitask and engage in conversation with other people or have an awareness of my surroundings. Yeah, so those are my works in progress, gone back into my basket. Because I am a knitter, therefore I must have a basket. So now I'd like to talk to you about mending. And this is where we are starting to get a little bit more towards my personal making philosophy. I've been making clothing since I was 13 years old, so more than half of my lifetime. And in that time, I've often found myself feeling quite reluctant to carry out the act of mending on my own clothing. That doesn't mean that I've thrown things away necessarily because it's worn out or it needed to be repaired, but more that just stuff gets put into a pile, the pile gets larger, I look at the pile, I ignore the pile, I go and make something new, and then the cycle repeats. And so for part of my lifetime, for part of my career, actually quite a lot of my career, I have made things on a professional basis, and I have carried out repair work as a professional basis on clothing, on garments, let's say, rather than clothing, on garments. And I think that, to be honest with you, quite a large part of the fact that I've hated to mend stuff for myself has been because I had to do it at work, sometimes for 10-hour shifts, sometimes for 12, 13-hour shifts. I would be carrying out repair work on garments. And also when I was younger, I used to wear a lot of vintage clothing, and I would wear it at work because I wanted to look good, and because I didn't want to dress practically at work because it was so awful and dull. So I wanted to wear my vintage at work, which means that, you know, when you're running up and down a 7-story building, on your hands and knees, scrabbling around in the dark, before you wonder what the hell I was doing, I was working backstage in the theatre in this job when I'm talking about running. Oh my God, the stage was in -2 and my department was on floor 5, so, you know, 7 stories, scrabbling around in the dark and just generally being very physical. Your clothing absorbs that impact of what you're doing, and there's a lot of wear and tear. And so when I was wearing vintage, it was breaking all the time, and I would be repairing stuff for work and then repairing stuff of myself. It was super boring, and really sadly, actually, quite tragically, when I moved house 9 months ago, I had to downsize very, very radically, and I had to throw away more than half of my wardrobe because the wardrobe in the new house was half the size of the wardrobe that I'd previously had. And I ended up just getting rid of most of my vintage. I didn't even list it online. I just took it to an Oxfam shop, which is a charity shop in the UK that often has vintage concessions, and they sell online. And I said to them, here is some vintage and antique clothing. There is clothing here that is 100 years old. Please make sure that it gets to the right place. And, you know, they were very happy, you know, to take that note. So I feel good that it's going. Hopefully it's not going just to the ragman. Hopefully it's going to someone who knows how to appreciate it and knows how to care for the clothing much better than I was able to, at a profit for a charity. So mending. I am hoping that by sharing mending projects on this video channel and by making it a regular part of what I'm doing here, it will inspire me and motivate me and incentivize me to do a bit more mending. And also I'd love to hear about anyone watching. What is your attitude to mending and repair work? Not just on your own handmade garments, but also on shop bought garments. So here is a machine knit lamb's wool sweater that belongs to my partner. I'm not sure if it reached him first hand or second hand, but he's owned it for a number of years and he looks really lovely in it. It's a wonderful fine 100% lamb's wool, and sadly he hasn't been able to wear it for a long time because it was living in the freezer, and it was living in the freezer because it had been visited by some horrible creatures called clothing moths. Without getting into that in a bit more, basically it was quite damaged, not through wear but also through the moths, and so I fixed it. I spent one Saturday morning in my pyjamas working on it for him, and he was very grateful, and now he can wear it again and we can turn the heating down. So there are a combination of small and large holes because there was a little bit of just general wear and tear combined with the moth damage. So really some large holes are about a 5p piece to a 10p piece, so you know, slightly less than an inch in diameter. And there were also like areas where it was like a sprinkling of tiny little moth bitey holes. So for the larger holes, I did some basic darning. I stitched around the hole to secure it and then weaved back and forth. For the smaller hole, there's a very large patch under the arm and under the other arm. And for the areas where it was more like moth bitey damage, oh no, I can see another one. That's not moth though, that's just wear and tear. I, like down here in the ribbing, I kind of just stitched around it in a spiral, just did a running stitch and just kind of kept going and catching in my thread. And I used a fingering weight lace knitting type of yarn. It was very fine fingering weight, you know, but heavier. The point is that it was heavier than the thread of this garment because it was machine knit, but it worked out fine. I used a dark blue, so it's not the same blue. So yeah, it's not visible mending because I haven't done it in pink or orange or white. I've done it in blue, but it's a different blue. So it's kind of like, you know that it's there, we know that it's there, we can see the repair, we can enjoy the fact that it's been repaired. And it's not really a big deal. Like, I don't think anyone's gonna ask him, hey, what is that thing on your sweater? Because they really shouldn't have their nose that close to my boyfriend. Anyway, so that's that. I will be sharing other mending projects in future videos, but like I said, I'd really like to hear about your attitude towards mending. Do you have any tips? Do you incorporate it into your routine of making? Or like me, does it just kind of become a stack that you deal with in different ways? Let me know. I'd really like to hear about it, and hopefully I'd really like to create some dialogue about longevity of garments, you know, what it means after we first make something, what it means after it goes into a wardrobe and it sits there for more than a decade. You know, how do we continue to incorporate garments into our lives? How does the life of the garment change? So yeah, tell me about your mending. Conversational threads. So now, to finish this video, I'd like to pick up on a few of the threads that I have mentioned earlier on and talk about them a little bit more, accompanied by some cold tea. Welcome to my first video. Thanks for sitting through most of it. This is literally my first video that I've ever made, and I've been encouraged to start documenting my making, my knitting in video for quite a while, encouraged by friends, both knitting friends and non-knitting friends, because they exist and, you know, we're allowed to have them. And it's taken me quite a while to get started. And mostly I would say that's because of the, let's say, the quite particular demographic that's been represented in knitting videos, knitting podcasters over the last few years. Now, obviously, it's growing, it's changing all the time, but certainly when I first started watching knitting podcasts a couple of years ago, and to be honest with you, now as well, it's been quite dominated by people who've got quite a different, let's say, level of disposable income than me. Now, I'm not in any way trying to be judgmental about anyone. It's simply that I can't really relate because I choose to spend my money, you know, what money I do have, in a different way. Everyone's situation is different. This is not about me judging other people's lifestyles, simply stating that I found it very, very difficult to relate to people's lifestyles and what I was seeing quite a lot of the time. And I didn't resent them for it, because I really enjoyed watching their podcasts. I really enjoyed, you know, seeing people's walls of yarn, because for me, it's a fantasy and it's not my lifestyle. That doesn't mean that I can't engage with it or enjoy it, but it's not me. And for the longest time, I felt like, because I didn't have that kind of lifestyle, my own interpretation of making, my own making practice, wouldn't really be of interest to other people. And I've been assured by my friends that that's not true. And to be honest with you, yeah, why not give it a go? Because I'm sure there's other people in my situation, just as there are plenty of people in different situations more generally. So I live in suburban London. I live in a tiny little flat in a really unfashionable area of outer East London towards Essex that has not been gentrified, haha. As such, storage is at a premium, space is at a premium. And me personally, I do not have a lot of disposable income to spend on knitting and crafts, and I never have, to be honest with you. Occasionally I've treated myself. This garment was the most I'd ever spent on yarn ever. I think that the skeins were, gosh, probably about £12 a skein, and I bought 5, and I didn't use all of them even. And that was the most money I'd ever spent on a garment. So yeah, it's always been a case. I've always had to be quite frugal and very creative in that sense as well. So I'm hoping to share, you know, what I'm doing and making things that are really beautiful, making things that are really beautiful and don't cost the earth, both fiscally and metaphorically, in terms of sustainability. And it's things like my scrap socks, where, you know, I want to use up everything that I can, every little last bit, and still make something that looks really cool. Yeah, so going back to what I said before, you know, I do not own a set of sock blockers as it is. I put a piece of cardboard in my sock. I do not own a set of blocking mats. I use my yoga mat, or sometimes just some towels on the floor, and it works. My making philosophy, ever since I've started making things, is that things need to be both beautiful and functional. And this loosely paraphrases a quote from William Morris, the British socialist 19th century pattern designer. Unfortunately, I've not been able to ascertain the original source, but to be honest with you, I haven't read Morris's original writings. I've only read, you know, interpretations of his work in essays and seen exhibitions and so on. But he said, have nothing in your home that you do not find to be beautiful or know to be useful. Beautiful and useful. And that really says it all for me. And when I first read this, I think it was on the wall of the William Morris Gallery in Walthamstow, in northeast London. It just rang so true in terms of what I've always done. I like to surround myself with things that are gorgeous, things that are beautiful, things that are colourful and vibrant and really add something to my life. But there's only space if they have a purpose. There's only space for it because I live in a tiny little flat. And I don't have, you know, I don't have very much storage. So, you know, things like cushions are fine, but I've never been very big on ornaments, or toys, things like that. You know, it's got to have a purpose. And that also blends a little bit with what I learned about Swedish Functionalism, the design movement and philosophy, that really came into its own in the post-war period in Sweden and elsewhere in Scandinavia. And I learnt about Swedish Functionalism in an exhibition on Sweden's women designers that I saw in Stockholm in the Design Museum a couple of years ago. And functionalism is really it. You know, if an object has a purpose and does its purpose well, therefore it is beautiful and we can welcome it into our lives. Now, personally, I like a little bit more ornament and colour than is typically demonstrated by Swedish Functionalism, but the philosophy is definitely something that I chime with. And that's really what I want to be bringing into my podcasts, you know, looking at the value of an object in terms of its use and kind of going beyond constructed value in, for example, marketing. You know, I've never been one for brands, hence I've always made my own clothing for my entire adult life. And to be honest with you, this is something that I think rings true for a lot of knit makers, a lot of knitters, because we educate ourselves so much on materials, on the process of creating materials. I think certainly more than the average consumer, the average purchaser of ready-made goods. You know, I think we're really very, very invested in what our materials mean. So yeah, it's about use value, it's about function, and it's also about beauty. I think that that's really, really important. Touching also on the demographic issue of podcasters, I will say that I am not very aware of very many minority ethnic knitting craft video makers in the UK. I know that they must exist. I just don't think that I've found them. Therefore, if you self-identify, you know, if you are happy to call yourself a minority ethnic British person who loves handcrafts, loves making things, please get in touch with me. Please leave me a comment below. I would love to get to know you. If you make videos, great. I'd love to watch them, because I'm sure that it's only my own ignorance. And I am aware of other video makers who are essentially non-European, but who are of different nationalities. And so I have a mixed ethnic heritage. I live in England. I'm not English. I have no English in my blood. And I've watched videos by for example, Basic Stitch Knitting, and Celine is based in Hong Kong. She comes from Malaysia. I've also watched the Pinfeathers and Purls podcast, and Candice is Chinese Canadian. But I am not aware of other people of Asian heritage, of minority ethnic background, who are based in the UK. So I'd really like to find out more. I'm really looking forward to sharing the beautiful yet frugal side of knitting with you guys, and I'd love to hear what other people do as well. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining in and watching my video premiere. I really appreciate it. Like I said, please do comment down below if you have some tips and thoughts about mending, and if you have some thoughts and tips about frugality in knitting. So elsewhere online, you can find me on Instagram and on Ravelry as a sour telling, so a sour telling. That's where I document my trials and tribulations in making and share things which I think are beautiful. I share a lot of my houseplants on Instagram as well. I'm hoping to podcast every 3 to 4 weeks, so probably around once a month, maybe twice a month if my schedule allows for it. I'm looking forward to getting to know you in the comments. Please do get in touch, and happy knitting.